Hey! Hi, how you doing? This is the Gamertron and welcome back to the Gamertron Show. You know, I love video games. I adore video games. Video games are amazing! But gamers? The gaming community? They're really insufferable sometimes. The past few years, I have noticed a recent trend in comment sections and discussions and posts, and that's calling a particular video game dead. Now, when it comes to multiplayer games, this is an actual, reasonable topic of discussion. Because with multiplayer-only video games, how many players are playing that multiplayer-only video game at any time, at any specific time, determines whether or not the game is alive and thriving and playable and buyable. You don't want to buy and or play a multiplayer game if there's no one playing it, because then it's useless. If there is literally no one playing the game or a severe lack of people playing the game, there's only a small amount of people playing the game, that affects how much content in this multiplayer game you can interact with in terms of what game modes players are playing, how often you get into the match with matchmaking, finding players to make full teams, the player base, and the amount of players playing a multiplayer-only video game at any specific time is something worth discussing. It's a worthy debate. Because with multiplayer, the amount of players playing the game matters. No duh. So while it can be irritating when certain gamers are trolling or trying to build a false narrative to suit some irrational personal agenda by calling a multiplayer game dead even though there's a ton of people playing the game, now comments, discussions, posts have started to arise the past few years saying this video game is dead or dying even though it's a single-player game, or has a single-player mode alongside the multiplayer. And this just blows my goddamn mind, how people come to these bizarre conclusions or say these things. Like, I know some say it to troll, to get a rise out of people. They're lying, they know they're lying, and they're lying for the sake of a response. But there are some individuals that honestly believe that single-player only games, or games with a single-player mode, can die. Why, gaming community, why? Why do you do this? Why do you support or entertain these bizarre, nonsensical ideas? Alright, for the sake of discussion, let's point out the obvious, shall we? First off, single-player only games. Single-player only games cannot die or be dying. The amount of players playing a single-player video game at any given time is not an argument for the game's quality, how good or bad it is. It is not an argument for how much content the game possesses. It is not an argument for whether or not the general gaming population considers this video game a success or a failure. And I shouldn't need to explain this, because it's a single-player video game, and there are different variables to a single-player video game, and how many people are playing a single-player video game at any given time when compared to a multiplayer game. First and most obvious case for this, a single-player video game does not rely on the interaction of other people playing the game at the same time as you. The game does not rely on other players playing the game for you to experience the content that is on offer in the game. Multiplayer requires multiple players. That's why it's called multiplayer, because the game is not playable without multiple people playing it at the same time. That's how this works. Single player requires a single player, a single person playing the game. A single person can experience the content whenever they want at any time. So once again, the amount of people playing a single-player game at any given time does not hinder you from playing that game. The game is specifically constructed and built for a single person to play that game without relying on other people to be playing that game at the same time as them. This is basic. This is basic multiplayer single-player 101. This is basic video games, how they work 101. Why do I need to explain this? Making the statement that a single-player video game is dead is making the statement that it's unplayable, because a dead video game is unplayable. Saying that a multiplayer game is dead is making the statement that it's not alive, that it can't be played. To bring up an unfortunate example, one of my favorite first-person shooters and one of my favorite multiplayer games of all time, Titanfall. Titanfall is multiplayer only. You can only play that game with other people. It is impossible to play it solo. Its content can only be experienced by the presence of other players. Therefore, years down the line, when there are 0 people playing Titanfall, it's an unfortunate truth. It's eventually going to happen, but there will come a time when 0 people are playing Titanfall and the game will be dead. It will be unplayable. The game does have a PvE co-op mode, but it's co-op only. You require other people to play that mode. So as sad and as unfortunate as it is, as much as I love Titanfall, there will come a time where that game is actually dead. It will be unplayable. And that's such a goddamn shame. However, making the absolutely fucking absurd statements such as Fallout 4 is dead and or dying, Mirror's Edge Catalyst is dead and or dying, or Quantum Break is dead and or dying, or finally, the game that I first started to see this behavior start to spawn from, The Order 1886, is dead and or dying. Which is goddamn impossible, because they're single-player only games! Now, to continue pointing out the obvious, the amount of people playing a single-player game at any given time is not a determining factor for the quality of the game, how good or bad it is, and or public opinion of the game. Because, and I can't believe I need to explain this, because some people only play a single-player game once they beat the story, the main story, they're done with the game. Some people replay single-player over and over again. Some people only play single-player games at certain times of the day for a certain period of time. Some people only buy and play single-player games when they've had a price drop or sale. And the list of variables and situations and different types of people and gamers and reasons to play a single-player game go on and on and on. I recently got into a very stupid discussion with someone who was stating that Skyrim was a better game than Fallout 4 because there were more people playing Skyrim on Steam, on PC, at that current time. Well, no fucking duh! Skyrim has been out for years. It's been out way longer than Fallout 4. Skyrim has had multiple price drops, so people who didn't buy the game day one at full price have bought it years later at a much cheaper price. When a game has been out longer and has had multiple price drops, many more people over the years, via those price drops, have been buying Skyrim. Fallout 4 hasn't even been out for over a year yet, and has had very few price drops, if at all. But I shouldn't need to explain this, because this is common sense, and this is obvious. Yet there are people out there on the internet that are actually debating the quality and the success of single-player games, and calling them dead if no one's playing it, and saying if there's less people playing this single-player game than this other single-player game, then that means that single-player game is better and or more successful. No, that's not how the world works. That's not how people work. That's not how playing video games, specifically single-player video games, work. When you take into account that a single-player video game can be played at any time, and you can experience it for however much time you want, depending on how much time you have available or how much time you want to put into the game, depending on how many people have bought the game, how long has the game been out, how many sales and price drops has it had. If you want to talk about how many people have bought this single-player game, by all means discuss the sales of a single-player game. But how many players are playing a particular single-player game at any given time is not an argument for its quality or how successful it is. You've also got to keep in mind that some video games have excessive fan bases. Just people who love those games in general and are going to replay those games over and over again. Like, god damn it, there are so many variables as to playing single-player games and how many people are playing single-player games at any given time. And there are so many reasons why a particular player could be playing that single-player game. It's just not an argument. It's not a valid argument for debate. Number of copies sold? Depending on the time frame of when the game was released, how long it's been out, there is something to talk about. There's a discussion for debate for how successful in terms of sales the game was, in terms of marketing, how many people had interest in the game. However, the quality and enjoyability of a particular video game, single player, we'll just keep it single player, the enjoyability and the quality of a particular single player game, while there are some obvious objective facts as to the quality, the overall quality of the game, whether you will enjoy the game or not is completely subjective. And with today's gaming community mentality, subjectivity and objectivity are greatly confused when it comes to a great deal of games, but that's a discussion for another time and one I've already had in previous videos. The point being though, when it comes to single-player only video games, they cannot die. It is fundamentally impossible for a single-player game to be dead. If I can play this single-player video game and experience its content anytime, at my leisure, without the need for other players, then it cannot die. And how many people are playing a particular single-player video game at any time of the day is not a valid argument for its quality or its success. There are too many variations and variables to use number of players playing that game as an argument. Alright, that was just single-player only games. Now, let's talk about video games that have both single-player and multiplayer game modes. Now, when it comes to video games that have single-player and multiplayer game modes, the multiplayer portion of that game can absolutely die. There is no question about that. There is a nearly endless list of video games that have single-player and multiplayer where the multiplayer is actually dead. And that is a valid, rational argument and criticism to make towards a video game. Saying that the multiplayer is dead is perfectly fine. If there is no one playing the multiplayer, then yes, the multiplayer is dead. But calling a video game in its entirety a game that has single player and multiplayer, calling the whole thing dead, saying the game is unplayable, no one's playing it, you cannot play this game because no one else is playing it, is a straight up lie. Saying video games like Evolve, Star Wars Battlefront, Battleborn, Tom Clancy's The Division, Destiny, Watch Dogs, and get this, someone actually stated this, Warframe. Yes, that's right. I've seen comments, posts, and discussions stating that Warframe is dead and or dying. Oh, you fools. Okay, let us continue with the pointing out of the obvious. All of these games previously mentioned cannot be dead. They cannot be dead games. They cannot be unplayable. Just because the multiplayer portion of the game doesn't have as many players as you would like playing it, doesn't mean the game as a whole is dead and or dying. If you can still play the game at any time, whenever you want, and still experience, if not all the content, at least a vast majority of the content, single player, then the game is not dead. It cannot die. It is immortal. If a video game has single player, if it's a single player only game, or it has a single player mode, then that video game is fundamentally incapable of dying. If you can fully experience the game without the need, the requirement for other players at that specific time you want to play the game, it is not dead. Single player ensures, it's a 100% guarantee that a game cannot die. Years later, decades later, these video games can still be bought and played, experienced, and enjoyed. So, just to recap, even if people stop playing the multiplayer portion of a video game, if the video game has a single player portion, a single player mode of any form, whether it be a story campaign, a survival horde mode, bots, offline private multiplayer matches with AI bots replacing the players. Point being, if a video game has anything resembling a single player that someone can play by themselves at any time, then that video game cannot die. Its multiplayer portion can die, but the game as a whole cannot die. So making the statements that Evolve, Battleborn, The Division, Watch Dogs, Rainbow Six Siege, Warframe, Battlefield, Call of Duty, Unreal Tournament, Quake, and the list goes on and on and on, making the statement that any sort of video game like those mentioned are dead, dying, unplayable, are straight up lies. If you call one of those video games dead, dying, unplayable, you are lying. Can the multiplayer portions of those games die? Yes. The multiplayer side of those games can be unplayable because they require other people. But if a game has single player, and anyone can play it at any time, whenever they want, for as long as they want, then that video game cannot die. It is incapable of dying as a whole. The only games that have the possibility of dying are multiplayer only. Multiplayer can die. Single player can never die. And making the statement, making the argument, making the debate that a single player only game or that a video game with a single player mode can die is irrational, illogical, and just downright impossible. However, in the end, as always, this is all just my opinion. What's yours? Let me know your thoughts, feelings, and opinions on the topic of this video in the comment section below. I love reading comments. I get nearly enough comments. Please leave a comment. If you like the video in any way, shape, or form, please hit the like button. Hitting the like button helps you, helps me, helps everybody involved with the video if you hit the like button. If you want to help out and support this video, then please share it on social media, Twitter, and Facebook. If you want to help out and support me directly, then please consider pledging and becoming a patron on my Patreon. Anyways, guys, this has been a video. I hope you liked the video. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you all later.